Hello friends, enemies, and internet strangers alike. If you're new here, my name's Angie. Welcome to my channel. Today I'll be wrapping up the books that I read from the end of December to the end of January, and overall I'm excited to do this because it was a fairly good reading month and some change for me. The first book that I'm including in this wrap-up is Lessons in Chemistry. Lessons in Chemistry is a fiction novel set in Southern California in the 1960s. It follows a brilliant scientist named Elizabeth Zott who finds herself somewhat reluctantly becoming the host of a popular cooking show, Supper at 6, which is a far cry from her work as a chemist at a local research institute. The story follows her journey from university to becoming a scientist to becoming the TV show host and a single mother. The story explores sexism in the workplace, challenging the status quo and the true meaning of family. It weaves together the past and present to formulate its narrative. Also, trigger warning, there is a description of sexual assault fairly early on in the story, and it caught me off guard, honestly. Probably because this book is one that I went into blind. I was surprised when I started reading it because to me, the cover screams contemporary romance, and that's actually what I thought I was getting into. There is a romantic subplot in this book. This is by no means a romance novel. That being said, I truly did love the love story in this book. I just have a soft spot for that sort of outcast nerd type romance coming together and becoming each other's family. It just gets to me. I think I broadly categorize this book as fiction because while I've seen the argument that it's historical fiction, to me the way that it handles sexism, feminism, equality in the workplace was just done through a contemporary lens. Elizabeth Zott, while quirky and innovative, in a lot of ways was ahead of her time. That just would have been out of place for that time period. My general feelings overall about this book were pleasantly surprised. I mean, after I got over the initial shock of, oh, this is not a contemporary romance book, and accepted it as a work of fiction, I thought that it was well written, the premise was decently executed, and overall it was a unique story. This was also one where I finished it and was like, oh, I liked that. And then I opened up Goodreads and looked at all the reviews and everyone was like, I hated this book, it was horrible. And I was like, oh. I mean, look, I ended up giving it 4 stars. I read a lot of back and forth about the way that it handled feminism being too unrealistic and too fantastical. And I guess for me, I just can't be mad at a book that explores important themes in a consumable way. Like, clearly this book has mass appeal. I found out after finishing it that it was picked up to be a TV show, and overall, I agree with a lot of the concepts that it was trying to convey. That's just me and my opinion though. I think if you're sensitive to stereotypes or need a perfectly accurate representation of the 60s, this probably isn't your book. The next book that I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry. This was a contemporary romance novel that follows 2 exes who haven't told their best friends about their breakup, which makes their friend group's annual week-long rendezvous at a coastal Maine cottage super awkward because they find themselves having to pretend that they're still together in order to not be the rain cloud on everyone's good time during this getaway. Cue unresolved textual tension, miscommunication, and second chances galore. So I read Emily Henry's other book, Book Lovers, and I actually really liked that one. I found her writing to be funny and not too syrupy, which is something that I appreciate in a contemporary romance, so I checked this book out on that alone. I liked another one of her books. What I didn't know going into this book was it was a second chance book about exes, so when the ex was introduced early on, I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be a source of conflict when she finds her real soulmate, which must be, you know, a cute lifeguard or another tourist visiting the area. Oh. And I really only mention it because I just don't love the second chance trope when it comes to exes. I'm just someone that believes your ex should stay your ex. But look, that's not the book's fault for being what it is, so I pushed on. But then I realized that their whole dynamic was going to be so much miscommunication, which again, generally is just not a trope that I like. I mean, we're all adults here, come on. I find open communication to be sexy, and that's what gets me going. The irony here is that the characters were caught up in their own assumptions about each other, and that's what got them into that mess, and I was caught up in my own assumptions about this book. But okay, look, stay with me here. I acknowledge, again, not the book's fault for being what it is. I ended up pushing on because I know how much everyone loves this book, and it ended up being a perfectly fine romance story. It wasn't remarkable. I didn't like it as much as Book Lovers, but overall it was a cute story. I gave this book 3 stars. For me, a 3-star book are books that are a bit better than average, and that's about right for how I felt for this book. If anything, the fact that it contains 2 tropes I just generally don't like, and I still ended up liking the book overall, should speak volumes about it. So I think that if you like either of those tropes, then you're probably going to love this book. I spent a good part of January getting through 1,600 pages of Crescent City 1 and Crescent City 2, House of Earth and Blood, and House of Breath and Sky, because I wanted to be able to read the 3rd book that just released a couple days ago alongside some of my other reader friends. So I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and read these books before the release. I actually did a longer good, bad, and ugly breakdown of Crescent City 1 that I'll link down below in case you're interested in that. But because of that, I won't spend too much time here. But overall recap, this series is SJM's take on adult fantasy. The story follows a half-human, half-fae named Bryce, who lives in this sprawling urban fantasy metropolis called Crescent City. She has to reluctantly join forces with a fallen angel named Hunt in order to investigate these murders that are plaguing the city. Hunt is enslaved as the Archangel's assassin, and he is known as the Shadow of Death. As their investigation progresses, they find out that the murders are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the threat looming on their city. There are high stakes, an intricately built world, and a large cast of characters and creatures, and some spice. This series is a masterclass on info dumping, and I just believe these books are much longer than they needed to be. That being said, I actually enjoyed the first book in the series much more than I was expecting to. I ended up giving it 3.75 stars, rounded up to a 4. That's because I really enjoyed the focus on female friendship, and there were several twists that kept me engaged, which might be the highest I've ever rated an SJM book that I've ever read. The second book I still found interesting, but there was some second book syndrome muddiness that I didn't care for. I ended up giving that one 3 stars. I have a hard time recommending this series because I just feel like overall, not many people would actually like it. I mean, if you're already an SJM fan with some patience, then yeah, this is probably worth a try to you. I think the reason why I enjoyed it as much as I did is I don't mind info dumping. I like backstory, I like lore, and I found the world to be interesting, but I realize I'm in the minority when it comes to things like that. I just think a lot of people don't have time to read a bunch of blah. If you're not a fan of her writing style, I mean, I do think it's an improvement from ACOTAR in terms of craft, but it still reads like her writing, and because of those reasons, I'm just a bit torn. So the next book that I read was Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. This is a romantic fantasy novel that follows 36-year-old Hala, who is a widow and a housekeeper who inherits her uncle by marriage's estate after he passes. Unfortunately, with that comes the extended family, and they complicate her inheritance by locking her in a room because they want the estate for themselves. So it's in this room she unsheaths an enchanted sword, unleashing an immortal swordsman whose only mission is to protect its wielder. This was recommended to me by a friend who absolutely adored the book. I would say it definitely fits the bill for cozy fantasy and at times gave me the Princess Bride vibes in terms of its humor. A good way to describe this book is chaotic road trip adventure. If you think the premise sounds interesting, you're looking for low stakes, like lighthearted humor and closed door romance, and want an older FMC who's child-free, then this might be your book. For me though, I found the FMC a bit annoying, and I had told my friend at one point that the back and forth between the FMC and the MMC reminded me of Shrek and Donkey, just in the way that the FMC would not stop asking questions, which maybe Shrek is not the vibe when it comes to a romance book. I found the plot to be a little too linear, and the book as a whole too dialogue heavy. The type of humor in this book just didn't really resonate with me either. Just for example, there was a scene with some bathroom jokes followed by a scene with sexual innuendos, and I just don't really vibe with that kind of humor. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars because there were some cute moments, and overall I did like the MMC decently enough. I just think this was more of a case of bad book fit than it was bad book, if that makes sense. The last book that I read this month was First Lie Wins. It's a thriller book that followed a con artist / thief who receives job assignments from the mysterious Mr. Smith. Every new assignment, she assumes a new identity. So for this latest job, she's finding the stakes higher than ever because she's having to prove herself due to a previous assignment failure. Think cat and mouse, mystery and secrets galore. I devoured this book in a day, and I don't know if that's just because it's been a while since I've read a thriller. I just found the story's premise to be a refreshing change of pace from the typical thriller formula. I thought the dual timeline was well executed, it was well written, well paced, and clever, and it just hit all the right beats for me for the genre. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I just love when the month ends on such a solid note. And that concludes all the books that I read for this wrap up. Until next time.